The studio was buzzing with energy that day. People laughed, clapped, and whispered to each other as they waited for the show to begin. Cameras were rolling, lights were shining, and the air smelled faintly of coffee and makeup. The excitement was palpable, the kind of energy that makes a person feel like something big is about to happen. Everyone in the audience had their eyes on the stage, hoping for a glimpse of someone they admired, someone who had become a symbol of kindness, humility, and quiet strength. That person was Keanu Reeves. Keanu was a name that carried weight in the world of movies. But beyond the glitz and glamour, people knew him for something else: his genuine nature, the way he treated others with respect, and the humility he seemed to carry naturally, almost effortlessly. Unlike many celebrities who seemed larger than life, Keanu had a calm presence. It wasn't flashy or attention-seeking. He didn't need to make a show of himself because his kindness spoke louder than any headline ever could. The host, Steve Harvey, was already on stage, cracking jokes and warming up the audience. His laughter was contagious, bouncing through the studio and lighting up the faces of everyone watching. Steve had a way of making people feel at ease, of turning nerves into laughter, and he knew the value of genuine moments. But even he couldn't have predicted the kind of impact that would happen in just a few minutes as Keanu walked onto the stage. There was a noticeable hush. The audience erupted into applause, cheering and clapping as they tried to catch a better view. Some people shouted his name, not loud enough to disturb him, but just enough to show their excitement. Keanu waved gently, smiling in a way that felt natural and unforced. There was no pretense, no performance beyond the simple act of being present. It was that very simplicity that made him so magnetic. He took a seat, and the conversation began. At first it was light, filled with laughter and stories from his career funny moments on movie sets, little mistakes that somehow became cherished memories, and the odd challenges of being a public figure. Steve was skilled at drawing people out, asking questions that were both entertaining and revealing. But somewhere in the middle of the interview, he asked a question that made the room fall quiet. Steve leaned forward, curiosity shining in his eyes, and asked Keanu what truly drove him in life. Not the fame, not the movies, not the awards, what really mattered. It was the kind of question that could catch anyone off guard, a moment where the masks we all wear start to slip. The audience waited, holding their breath, knowing that Keanu's answer would be more than just words. It would be a glimpse into the person behind the public image. Keanu paused for a moment, his gaze softening as he thought about how to answer. He didn't rush. He didn't look for the perfect line. Instead, he spoke with honesty and clarity, choosing words that were simple but carried a depth that few could ignore. He talked about kindness, about treating others with respect, about finding meaning in small moments and helping where he could. He spoke about the quiet satisfaction of knowing that your actions, however small, could make someone else's day a little brighter. The audience was silent. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes from boredom or confusion. This was the kind of silence that comes when people are truly listening, when every word resonates in their hearts. Keanu's message was simple, but it hit with the force of truth. In a world obsessed with success, wealth, and image, he reminded everyone that the real value in life lies in humanity, compassion, and the small choices we make every day. Steve Harvey's reaction was immediate. At first, he smiled, nodding as if to show he understood. But then something shifted. The comedian, known for his humor and quick wit, leaned back and blinked a few times, trying to process what he had just heard. There was a softness in his expression, a rare vulnerability that he didn't often show on camera. For a brief moment, the studio lights and cameras faded away, leaving just two people and the weight of the words spoken. Steve's eyes glistened. He laughed, not the kind of laugh that covers embarrassment or changes the subject, but the kind that bubbles up when someone is moved in a deep and unexpected way. He wiped a tear from the corner of his eye and shook his head, still smiling. "Wow," he said softly, almost to himself. "Wow, that's powerful." The audience murmured. Sensing the emotional shift, feeling the impact of something real in a space usually filled with rehearsed lines and punchlines, what made this moment remarkable wasn't just the words themselves, but the way they landed. Keanu didn't speak to impress anyone. He didn't aim for headlines or viral clips. He simply spoke from the heart, with the same sincerity he showed in every encounter. And Steve's reaction made it clear that true honesty and humility are rare, but when they appear, they resonate deeply with anyone who witnesses them. The studio stayed quiet for a moment longer. People in the audience exchanged glances, some nodding, some holding their hands to their hearts. It was as if everyone collectively understood that they had just witnessed something special, not just an interview, but a reminder of what really matters. In that pause, there was reflection, connection, and an unspoken appreciation for simplicity and kindness in a world that often values spectacle over substance. Keanu continued to talk, sharing small stories about his life outside the camera. He spoke about the joy of reading, of quiet mornings spent walking without a schedule, and the satisfaction of helping someone without expecting recognition. Each story was short, but each carried weight. They weren't tales of grand gestures or heroic feats. They were human stories, everyday experiences that reminded people that greatness isn't always measured in fame or money. But in empathy, patience, and care, Steve Harvey asked more questions. But the tone of the conversation had changed. There was a new depth, a shared understanding that went beyond laughter and entertainment. The audience could feel it too, and they responded with genuine applause and occasional laughter that wasn't forced. It was laughter that came from joy, from recognizing a truth that felt both personal and universal. By the time the interview segment ended, something had shifted in the room. The excitement of seeing a celebrity had transformed into something more meaningful, a shared human experience. People left the studio talking quietly among themselves, reflecting on what they had just heard. Many admitted that they had come expecting a typical celebrity interview, full of jokes and staged moments, but instead, they left with a story about real life, about compassion, and about the quiet power of living with integrity. Keanu Reeves, in his simple and unassuming way, had reminded everyone that the best moments in life aren't always the loudest. Sometimes they are quiet, personal, and sincere. And in that quietness, they hold more power than any spotlight, any applause, or any social media post ever could. For Steve Harvey, it was a moment he would never forget. A reminder that even someone used to making others laugh and feel inspired can still be moved, humbled, and reminded of the core of humanity in just a few words. As the audience filed out of the studio, they carried with them more than just memories of a celebrity encounter. They carried a message, one that would linger in their minds for days, perhaps weeks, that life is richer when we value kindness, when we treat others with respect, and when we take the time to be present in moments that matter. And all of this had started with one simple, heartfelt statement from a man who, despite the fame, never forgot the importance of being human. It was a beginning, not just of an interview, but of a story that would ripple outward, touching people in ways that couldn't be measured. And while cameras captured the moment for the world to see, the real story lived in the hearts of those who experienced it, quiet, sincere, and unforgettable. The moment after Keanu spoke, the energy in the studio shifted in a way that was almost tangible. What had started as a regular interview slowly transformed into something much deeper. People in the audience were leaning forward in their seats, not wanting to miss a single word. Even the usual background chatter faded, replaced by an almost reverent silence. There was a feeling in the air that what was happening wasn't just entertainment, it was a lesson, a glimpse into the life of someone who lived differently, someone who valued things that couldn't be measured by awards, money, or popularity. Steve Harvey, who usually moved with confidence and comedic timing, found himself caught off guard. He had asked the question expecting an interesting answer, maybe even something funny or clever, but what Keanu had said went beyond any expectation. It wasn't about what he had achieved in movies or the stunts or the awards. It was about something deeper, something real. Steve sat back for a moment, his eyes scanning the audience, as if looking for some sign that he wasn't the only one feeling this way. He wasn't. The silence lingered as Keanu continued to explain. He spoke about life not as a race or a competition, but as a series of small choices. how each day presented the opportunity to make a difference, even in ways that seemed invisible. He talked about the people who helped him without expecting recognition, the strangers who had been kind to him when he least expected it, and the lessons he had learned from ordinary experiences that shaped the way he treated others. His words weren't grand or dramatic, but they carried a weight that made everyone stop and think. For Steve, it was more than just a good answer. It was a mirror. He realized that in the hustle of work, fame, and life's pressures, it was easy to forget the small but meaningful actions that actually mattered. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, listening with a focus that the audience had rarely seen on a daytime show. His usual humor took a back seat as he absorbed every word. And for a moment, he looked almost vulnerable. Exposed by the truth of the message he was hearing, Keanu shared a story about walking through a city on a rainy day. He had seen someone struggling to carry groceries while keeping an umbrella in one hand. Without hesitation, he had helped, not thinking about recognition or praise, just acting because it was the right thing to do. To him, it was a small act, a fleeting moment in a day full of other responsibilities. But as he described it, it became clear that these small moments, multiplied across time, were what defined a life. The audience nodded along, smiling, some wiping tears from their eyes. It was simple, yet profoundly moving. Steve's voice broke the quiet when he finally spoke. "Man, that's the kind of thing we all forget to do," he said softly, almost to himself. "We get so caught up in everything else. We forget what really matters." His words hung in the air, heavy with realization. The audience felt it too because they knew he was right. Everyone had moments when they were too busy, too distracted, or too focused on what others expected of them. Forgetting that life was made up of these small, meaningful actions, Keanu smiled. But it wasn't the flashy Hollywood smile meant for cameras. It was a quiet, genuine expression. He didn't need to add drama or emphasis. His calm tone and the honesty in his eyes made his words resonate even more. "It doesn't take much," he said. "A simple gesture, a kind word, or just listening can change someone's day, and sometimes it can even change your own." The audience murmured, feeling the truth in that statement. It was simple, yet revolutionary in its quietness. The conversation turned toward Keanu's personal life, and he continued to share experiences that reflected his humble nature. He spoke about the people who had inspired him, not the famous ones, but ordinary people who showed courage, generosity, and resilience. He spoke of teachers, friends, and strangers who had touched his life in ways that fame or wealth never could. Each story was short, but it carried meaning, showing that life's greatest lessons often come from unexpected places. Steve Harvey, usually quick to jump in with a joke, was unusually quiet. He nodded, listening intently as Keanu talked about the importance of empathy. "Sometimes we don't realize," Keanu said, "that people around us are carrying battles we can't see. A little kindness, a little understanding. It goes a long way." The audience felt the weight of those words. It was a reminder that every interaction mattered, even the ones that seemed insignificant at first. As Keanu spoke, the cameras captured the subtle changes in Steve's expressions. His smile faded into thoughtfulness, his usual jokes replaced by quiet reflection. The audience watched, fascinated by this rare moment when a host was more moved than the guests he had interviewed for years. It was unusual to see, and it made the experience feel even more authentic. Here was a man known for laughter, humility, and guidance being reminded, through someone else's words, of the essence of humanity. Keanu went on to describe the lessons he had learned from failure and loss. He didn't dwell on tragedy or misfortune. Instead, he shared how challenges had taught him resilience, compassion, and patience. He explained that life was unpredictable and often unfair, but how one chose to respond was what truly mattered. The audience could feel the sincerity, and many leaned forward, hanging on each word, connecting with the vulnerability and strength in his story. Steve's reaction grew even more emotional. At one point, he paused and placed a hand over his chest. "I don't say this often," he admitted, "but listening to you, it hits deep. Makes me think about what I've been doing, what I've been missing. Makes me want to be better, to do better." The audience murmured in agreement, as if collectively sharing his realization. The moment was raw, unfiltered, and undeniably human. Keanu nodded quietly, understanding the power of the moment without needing to say more. He had a way of speaking that invited reflection rather than demanding attention. The room felt calmer, as if everyone was taking a collective breath, absorbing the lessons and emotions flowing through the conversation. It wasn't about celebrity or performance. It was about real human connection, about seeing someone speak from the heart and feeling compelled to do the same. The discussion also touched on how fame had shaped Keanu's perspective. He didn't speak bitterly or boast about his success. Instead, he acknowledged the opportunities he had, and how they allowed him to help others and make choices aligned with his values. "It's not about what you have," he said. "It's about how you use it, how you treat people, how you spend your time. That's what matters in the end." The audience absorbed this quietly, recognizing the honesty in the statement. Steve Harvey, still visibly moved, leaned closer and asked a question about legacy. Keanu's response was simple yet profound. "I don't think much about legacy. I try to focus on the present, on what I can do today to make life better for someone else. If that leaves a mark, that's enough." The words were not flashy or dramatic, but they carried a weight that resonated deeply with everyone present. It was a perspective rarely heard in the world of celebrities, and it left a lasting impression. As the interview continued, the atmosphere remained charged but calm. There was laughter, yes, and lighter moments, but the underlying tone was one of reflection. The audience was no longer just watching a show, they were part of a conversation that reminded them of the core of human connection, empathy, and the power of small, meaningful actions. By the end of the segment, Steve Harvey took a deep breath and looked directly at Keanu. "Man," he said quietly, "I'm not even sure I can sum up what this means. You just reminded me why we're here, why we do what we do. And for that, I thank you." The audience erupted in applause, but it wasn't the usual polite clapping. It was heartfelt, emotional, and genuine. People were moved, inspired, and quietly reflecting on how they could apply these lessons in their own lives. As the cameras stopped rolling and the lights dimmed, there was a sense of closure, but also of continuation. The words shared in that moment didn't end with the show, they carried forward. Everyone present knew they had witnessed something rare, a celebrity speaking with authenticity and a host being truly moved in response. It was a human moment, unpolished and unforgettable, a story that would linger in minds and hearts long after the studio emptied. Keanu Reeves left the stage quietly, without fanfare or extra gestures. His impact, however, was undeniable. He had reminded people of the importance of empathy, the value of small acts of kindness, and the quiet strength in being true to oneself. And for Steve Harvey, it was a moment that would stay with him, a reminder that even amidst laughter and entertainment, real human connection remains the most powerful force of all. The audience filed out, talking softly among themselves, sharing what resonated with them. Some spoke of the lessons they would take home, others of the simple humanity they had witnessed. No one wanted to forget this moment because it was rare, sincere, and profoundly human. It was proof that words, when spoken from the heart, can ripple outward in ways that touch lives and inspire change. In that one interview, something extraordinary had happened. Not because of cameras or stage lights, not because of fame or recognition, but because two people, one a celebrity known for humility, the other a host known for humor, had shared a moment of honest reflection. After the interview segment, something remarkable lingered in the studio. It wasn't the applause, the cameras, or even the jokes that Steve Harvey had made. It was the atmosphere, heavy with reflection and unspoken understanding. The audience, though still energized, seemed quieter in a different way, as if they were absorbing more than just words on a stage. They were absorbing a feeling, a sense that they had witnessed something truly human, something that transcended entertainment. Steve sat back in his chair, leaning slightly forward with his elbows on his knees, replaying Keanu's words in his mind. The way Keanu had spoken, the calm, unforced honesty, left him thinking about life in a way he rarely allowed himself. As a host, a comedian, and someone whose life revolved around the expectations of others, he was used to controlling the room, controlling the energy, and delivering a message that people expected. But in that moment, the control shifted. He was no longer the driver of the emotion in the room. He was the receiver. Keanu continued to speak, sharing small but meaningful stories from his life. He spoke about the times he had witnessed quiet acts of courage, people doing the right thing when no one was watching. A person helping an elderly neighbor carry groceries, someone giving up a seat on a crowded train, strangers stopping to comfort a child who was lost or scared. These weren't heroic feats in the traditional sense, but they were examples of everyday kindness, of the choices we make that define who we are more than anything else. He explained that these moments, though small, created ripples. One kind action could inspire another, and before long, what seemed insignificant could change someone's day or even their life. The audience was silent, but not out of boredom. It was a silence of recognition, a quiet understanding that they too had experienced these moments, or had failed to, and that there was something to learn from them. Steve Harvey, normally quick with a response or joke, was unusually still. His usual playful energy was replaced by thoughtfulness, a rare vulnerability on display. He leaned in slightly, listening intently, trying to hold back the emotion he felt building inside him. For someone like Steve, who was constantly surrounded by laughter, energy, and performance, this quiet human connection was both refreshing and overwhelming. It reminded him of the power of words spoken from the heart, without pretense. Without a hidden agenda, Keanu went on to share a story about an encounter on a subway. He had noticed a man struggling with a heavy bag, looking frustrated and exhausted. Without thinking, he had offered to help, and the man had smiled in gratitude. Keanu didn't dwell on the moment or try to make it sound heroic. To him, it was simple human decency, something anyone could do. But as he described it, the audience could feel the warmth and sincerity behind the act. It wasn't the gesture itself that mattered as much as the intention, the willingness to recognize someone else's struggle and respond with care. The room seemed to hold its breath as Keanu spoke, and then Steve's reaction broke through in a way no one expected. His voice trembled slightly and he leaned forward, resting his hands on his knees. "Man, that's real," he said softly. "That's real life. That's what we're missing sometimes." The audience nodded, some quietly agreeing, some wiping away tears. Steve had always been known for his humor and wisdom, but this was a raw, emotional reaction that felt genuine and unplanned. Keanu smiled gently, his calm demeanor never faltering. "It's easy to forget," he said. "We get caught up in what's urgent, what's loud, and we overlook the quiet opportunities to make a difference. Those little choices, they matter more than we think." The words were simple, but they hit hard. They were a reminder that life wasn't about fame, wealth, or recognition. It was about the quiet ways we affect the world and the people around us. Steve's expression shifted again, this time showing a mix of awe and reflection. He paused for a moment, looking around the room at the audience, then back at Keanu. "You know," he said, "we all talk about success, we all chase it. But maybe success is just being human, just being real, just being here for each other." The audience murmured in agreement. It was a moment that transcended the typical boundaries of a talk show. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't meant for entertainment. It was real life right there, unfolding in front of them. Keanu continued, speaking about the power of empathy. He described how small acts of understanding and compassion could transform relationships, communities, and even oneself. Listening to someone, acknowledging their struggles, offering help without expectation, these weren't grand gestures, but they were the foundations of a meaningful life. The audience could feel the sincerity, the weight of someone who had lived through challenges and learned to see life through a lens of humanity rather than ego or ambition. Steve, visibly moved, nodded repeatedly. He had spent years entertaining audiences, giving advice and sharing wisdom, but he had rarely felt so directly reminded of the simplicity and power of everyday kindness. He leaned back for a moment, his hand brushing his forehead, taking a deep breath as if to let the words sink in. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every subtle expression, but no one seemed to care about the performance. This was no longer about television or ratings. It was about truth and connection. Keanu shared another story, this time about a child he had met while traveling. The child had been shy, hesitant to speak, but Keanu had taken the time to listen, to engage without judgment. That small act of attention, he explained, had given the child confidence and comfort more than any grand gesture could have. The audience could see the point. It wasn't about what you gave materially, but what you offered from your presence, your heart, and your understanding. The conversation also touched on the struggles Keanu had faced personally. He didn't dwell on tragedy or hardship for dramatic effect. Instead, he explained how loss, disappointment, and challenges had taught him empathy, resilience, and the importance of connection. He spoke about the lessons he had learned not in public moments or through applause, but in quiet times in the spaces where real life happens. The audience felt the weight of those lessons, relating them to their own experiences, and understanding that the celebrity in front of them was more than a figure on a screen. He was someone who had lived, felt, and learned just like anyone else. Steve Harvey, usually quick to inject humor, remained silent for long stretches, absorbing each story. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, measured, and full of emotion. "You've reminded me," he said, "that life isn't about the spotlight. It's about the moments we share, the lives we touch, and the love we show without asking for anything in return." The audience responded with gentle applause, the kind that comes from hearts moved, not hands forced. Keanu nodded in agreement. "It's those small choices that make a life meaningful," he said. "Not the awards, not the attention, not the things we think will define us. It's how we act when no one is watching, how we treat people in ordinary moments, how we carry ourselves with care and respect." The simplicity of the message was striking. There was no grandiose speech, no complicated philosophy, just a reminder that the true measure of a life lies in its humanity. The studio felt different now, quieter in a profound way. The audience, though still engaged, seemed reflective, almost meditative. Some were whispering to each other about the stories they had just heard, while others sat back, lost in thought. It was as if everyone present had been given a small gift, the chance to reconsider their own lives, their actions, and their priorities. Steve Harvey, feeling the emotional weight, leaned forward again. "You know," he said, his voice catching slightly, "sometimes I forget. Sometimes I forget that people need realness, need kindness, need connection more than anything else. You just reminded me why we need to slow down, why we need to care." The audience nodded in agreement. The sincerity in his voice made it clear that this wasn't just a performance or a moment for the cameras. This was a genuine, heartfelt reaction. Keanu's final thoughts for the segment were quiet but powerful. He spoke about how life is unpredictable, how challenges are inevitable, and how people are flawed. But it is within that imperfection that the opportunity for empathy, kindness, and understanding lies. It doesn't require fame or wealth, it only requires awareness and intention. The audience absorbed every word, feeling a mix of comfort, inspiration, and the subtle nudge to act with more compassion in their own lives. By the time the segment ended, the studio was buzzing again, but not with the usual excitement or chatter. It was a buzzing of reflection, of thought, of hearts quietly moved. People talked about the moments that resonated with them, the simple truths they had been reminded of, and the lessons they could carry forward. It wasn't just another talk show episode, it was a human moment, rare, authentic, and unforgettable. Keanu Reeves quietly left the stage, his presence unassuming but his impact undeniable. Steve Harvey sat back, still absorbing the encounter, understanding that what had just happened was more than an interview, it was a reminder of what truly matters in life. And for the audience, it was a memory that would linger, a lesson in humanity wrapped in simplicity, empathy, and quiet strength. After the interview ended, the studio slowly settled, but the energy remained different from the usual buzz of a daytime show. People were still talking, but their voices were softer, filled with reflection. Many of the audience members were replaying Keanu's words in their minds. They weren't just thinking about the stories he shared, they were thinking about themselves, about the moments they had overlooked, about the kindness they hadn't offered when it would have mattered. It was the kind of reflection that sinks in slowly, leaving a quiet mark long after the cameras stopped rolling. Steve Harvey sat back in his chair, his usual energy subdued. The laughter, the jokes, the quick responses that had filled the studio earlier were replaced by a calm awareness. He could feel the weight of what had just happened, and he knew it wasn't something he would forget soon. For years he had interviewed celebrities, shared life lessons, and entertained audiences. But rarely had a moment landed this deeply, touching not just him, but everyone in the room. Keanu had left the stage quietly, as he always did. No fanfare. No dramatic exit. He didn't need it. His presence, the words he spoke, and the sincerity behind them had already made their mark. Yet, while he had left, the ripple of his impact had only just begun. People in the audience were exchanging glances, quietly nodding, whispering to each other about what had resonated with them. Some were inspired, some were emotional, and some were simply in awe of how much power there could be in simple, honest words. The impact didn't stop with the audience. Social media, as it always does, quickly caught on. Clips of Steve Harvey's reaction to Keanu's story began circulating online. But it wasn't just the words that drew attention, it was the genuine emotion. Steve's face, the moment he paused and let the feelings show, struck a chord with viewers. Comments poured in from people across the world, expressing gratitude, saying how rare it was to see something so human in the midst of entertainment. People shared stories of their own small acts of kindness, inspired by Keanu's example. As the show's producers reviewed the segment, they could see why it had the power to go viral. It wasn't sensational. It wasn't controversial. It was simple, authentic, and real. Keanu didn't say anything shocking or dramatic. He didn't brag or boast. He spoke about life the way most people never pause to, with awareness, kindness, and humanity. And Steve's reaction only amplified the moment, showing that even those who are accustomed to control, performance, and humor could be moved by the quiet truth. In the following days, Steve found himself thinking about the conversation repeatedly. Even when he was off camera, preparing for other shows, or sitting quietly at home, Keanu's words echoed in his mind. He found himself replaying the stories, remembering the subtle lessons about empathy, kindness, and attention to small but meaningful actions. It was rare for someone in his position to experience something that made him reconsider his own actions, his own priorities, but that is exactly what had happened. He started sharing the experience with friends, colleagues, and family, recounting the way Keanu had spoken and how the studio had shifted in response. Each retelling was slightly different, but the core remained. It wasn't about fame, not about spectacle, not even about entertainment. It was about something human and essential. People he spoke to were moved as well. They shared their own reflections, their own small stories of kindness or missed opportunities, and the conversation grew. The moment became bigger than a single show. It became a spark for reflection and awareness. Keanu, on the other hand, went back to his life quietly, without much fanfare. While the world buzzed about the interview, he returned to his routines, his walks, his moments of solitude. He didn't post about it on social media, didn't seek validation or attention. He simply carried on, quietly consistent in the way he lived, focusing on the small, meaningful actions that defined his day. And yet, the world noticed. People wrote articles, shared videos, and spoke about the quiet power of his words. It was a reminder that authenticity has a reach far beyond what anyone can control. The ripple effect continued to grow. Fans who watched the interview spoke about it to friends, family, and coworkers. Teachers used it as an example in classrooms to teach empathy and kindness. Community groups discussed it in meetings, reflecting on the way small actions can change lives. Even strangers who had never met Keanu or Steve felt a connection to the moment, inspired by the authenticity displayed on stage. It was a rare kind of influence, one that didn't rely on spectacle or hype, but on the simple, human truth of lived experience. For Steve Harvey, the experience became a point of reflection for his own work. He realized that while laughter, entertainment, and performance were valuable, there was an even deeper impact in authenticity and honesty. He began to look for opportunities to create moments that mattered, to guide conversations towards sincerity, and to ensure that his platform could highlight the human side of life, not just the glamorous side. It was a subtle shift, but a meaningful one that would shape future interviews and interactions. Audience members who were present in the studio also carried the moment with them. Many said that it reminded them to slow down, to notice the people around them, and to engage with empathy. Some shared that they had been inspired to help neighbors, reach out to friends, or simply listen more attentively to the struggles of others. The interview, simple in its format, had a profound effect on real life. Extending far beyond what anyone could have anticipated, Keanu's approach to life, as shared during the interview, was what made it so compelling. He didn't need to make a spectacle or dramatize his experiences. His stories were ordinary, but in their simplicity lay a truth that resonated universally. It wasn't about grand gestures, wealth, or fame. It was about living each day with awareness, compassion, and kindness. And in a world that often feels chaotic, loud, and self-centered, that message was refreshing, grounding, and inspiring. The media coverage of the interview reflected this sentiment. Articles emphasized the emotional honesty of the moment, highlighting the way Steve Harvey had been moved. Commentators noted the rarity of a celebrity speaking with such humility and the profound effect that simple, human actions could have. The story wasn't about sensational headlines or controversy. It was about connection, empathy, and the lessons we all could learn from everyday life. People began to share personal experiences, inspired by Keanu's words. They wrote about times when a small gesture had made a huge difference in their lives, times when kindness had been unexpected but deeply meaningful. The conversation spread across communities, schools, workplaces, and online forums. It became a gentle reminder that even in a busy, distracted world, humanity still mattered and small. Consistent acts of compassion could change lives. Even Steve Harvey's own reflection became a lesson for others. In interviews and social media posts following the show, he spoke about the importance of slowing down, listening, and noticing the little things in life that often go unrecognized. He shared the lesson he had learned from Keanu that even in the midst of fame, performance, and expectations, it's the human connections, the empathy, and the simple acts of kindness that define us. His openness about being moved by someone else's words inspired his fans to pause, reflect, and act more thoughtfully in their own lives. As weeks passed, the effect continued to ripple outward. People remembered the interview and the emotional honesty that accompanied it. They told friends, colleagues, and family members, sharing the lessons they had learned. The story became more than an interview. It became a quiet movement of awareness, inspiring people to focus on the humanity in their own lives and the lives of those around them. Keanu Reeves, quietly consistent in his own life, had shown the world that impact isn't always loud or visible. It's in the way we treat others, the choices we make in ordinary moments, and the integrity with which we live. His words on that stage, simple and honest, reminded everyone that the greatest influence comes not from spectacle, but from authenticity. Steve Harvey, still reflecting on the experience, realized that this moment had changed him too. Not in a dramatic, life-altering way, but in a quiet, meaningful way that would influence his future decisions, conversations, and interactions. He understood that real impact wasn't measured in ratings, applause, or attention. It was measured in the hearts and minds of people. In the way authenticity and empathy could inspire change, for the audience, the ripple continued. People carried the message into their daily lives, noticing the small opportunities to be kind, to listen, and to make a difference. The story of the interview became part of their personal reflections, a quiet guide for living with more awareness and compassion. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't viral for the sake of trends. It was real, human, and lasting. In the end, the moment was a testament to the power of sincerity and the unexpected ways it can touch lives. It reminded everyone that even in a world obsessed with fame, recognition, and spectacle, the quiet, genuine actions, the simple gestures of kindness and understanding remained the most impactful. The influence of that single conversation would continue to grow, quietly shaping perspectives and inspiring hearts long after the cameras were gone.